It's just a quick crash course in mastering because there is a lot that goes into mastering, and there's a lot that I think people don't think about sometimes, and I by no means am a master at mastering, but I will walk you through some of the stuff that I've had to do working for mastering studios and taking courses in mastering. But yeah, so I am going to screen share this beautiful PowerPoint that I have made. And let's see. Cool. So let's do it like, yeah, okay. So what is mastering? Isotope's definition of mastering is the term most commonly used to refer to the process of taking an audio mix and preparing it for distribution. Several considerations in this process: unifying the sound of a record, maintaining consistency across an album, and preparing for distribution. I have mainly been mastering singles at this point, so most of the album stuff isn't going to be covered when I do a quick little tutorial of a master because it's a lot more complex. And also, I think if you're just starting and you're at the beginning of a career, you're not really necessarily going to have to do loads of, DDP making and whatnot. But anyways, so slide 3. So mastering and mixing used to be done in the same process. People would mix their record, whatever, and then it was printed onto the wax of a vinyl. And after that, those wax discs were made into stamps, and the stamps would be used to make copies of all of the other, copies to distribute, whatever. But anyways, as time went on, there's new mediums, we have more need for mastering engineers. So think about it. An audio engineer or a tracking engineer does the recording, a mixing engineer mixes it, and then a mastering engineer has to figure out how it's going to translate for distribution. So, after we've developed CDs and cassette tapes, you have to figure out new ways of translating those mixes to new mediums. So mastering engineers are completely necessary. So there's different types of mastering DAWs. There's Sequoia and there's Pyramix. I worked a lot in Pyramix when I worked in New York, but Sequoia is also super similar to Pyramix, and they do almost the same things. They're very, very expensive DAWs, but they're more conducive to a mastering workflow. In Sequoia and Pyramix, you can use CD markers and create different sorts of fades, and you can individually, what's the word I'm looking for? Individually affect your tracks rather than having to commit and then make a new track and then put all of your plugins in again and then make another track. So I'll just dumb it down. Sequoia and Pyramix are used by many professional mastering studios. They have the ability to set up a full-length album with track markers. You can adjust the fades and spaces between each song. You can easily edit the metadata for each song. They also have the ability to create DDPs. These DAWs also allow for individual track editing, as I was just talking about, meaning you can affect each track differently without having to commit your mastering train from track to track. Basically, Sequoia and Pyramix are just DAWs that are set up to ease the workflow of a mastering studio. They are very, very expensive, and if you want to start out mastering, you can master in any DAW you really want to. It's not about whatever. This is just for people that have to do it all the time. They have to, it's create DDPs, send them to distribution, it's whatever. But, so, like I said, you can use other DAWs. You can, in fact, master in other DAWs. I choose to master in Pro Tools. I mostly use Pro Tools for everything I do. So I've set up a workflow in Pro Tools, and even one of my teachers who masters the Spotify singles was using Pro Tools up until 2 years ago, because it was just, you don't have $3,000 to drop on Sequoia or Pyramix, so you can actually do this in Pro Tools. The only downside is you will need an external DDP creator if you're going to do a full-length album for delivery. But there are cheaper versions of DDP creators than having it all in one DAW, so Sonorous and Hofa are two great DDP creators that are not going to totally break your bank. I use Hofa, but it's all preference. They do the same thing. What is a DDP and why do you keep talking about it? A DDP, or Disk Description Protocol image file, is an output format suitable for replicating CD digital audio, which can be placed on data disk or uploaded to the plant via FTP, File Transfer Protocol. Bob Katz is the best. Buy this book if you want to learn about it. Oh, I don't think you can see me. Anyways, I'll go to the books at the end. But anyways, if you want to learn anything about mastering or want to get into mastering, read Bob Katz's book, Mastering Audio, The Art and the Science. So basically, what holds the audio, the DDP is what holds the audio in the PQ codes. PQ codes is, the P is the beginning of a new track, the Q is the subcode that contains track length, ISRC codes, etc., yada, 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 a lot of other stuff, a lot of metadata and whatnot. There are 5 files contained in a DDP file. Most important is the image DAT, because that is the actual audio image file. And then there's DDPID, DDPMS, CD text bin, and PQ desk. It's kind of, so I mean, they're important and they need to be in your DDP file, but I can't totally tell you what each of them do or each of them stand for. I was just in charge of making the DDPs and I know they're important. So leave it at that. So MD5 files. An MD5 file is a checksum file that verifies the information in the DDP is correct. Most of mastering is making sure you are organized and have all of your info correct. And I would know this because I worked for a mastering studio in New York and I was tasked with making a DDP my first week working there, and I sent the wrong DDP information to Sony Classical and I was in loads of trouble. So make sure you have your MD5 files with your checksum so you can compare it against the DDP. You don't want to send out anything that is wrong because that is a huge, horrible thing in mastering. Mastering engineers are supposed to be the end of the entire process. And yeah, sending out incorrect DDPs equals really bad. Most of mastering is being organized and making sure everything is named and delivered correctly. And that is a picture of Swan Studios in New York City where I worked extensively. I spent most of my time in that basement with those tape machines. So, ISRC codes. I'm sorry, I'm going a bit fast through this, but this is just basics of mastering. I will put up a link for this PowerPoint if you guys want to download it, because it's actually just kind of a crash course for from the Bob Katz book, and just like the basics, surface level stuff that you need to know if you want to do mastering. So every song that gets distributed has an ISRC code, or an International Standard Recording Code. The ISRC code is made up of 12 digits. The first 2 are the country code. Next 3 is the code for the original issuing record label. The next 2 are the year of the release, and the next 5 are the record codes assigned to each version of the song. So if you have a song and its release, and then 20 years later somebody remasters it, it's going to have a new ISRC code because it's not the original, and every song has their own ISRC code regardless of covers or remasters. So yeah, edits and remasters have new ISRC codes. You can obtain your ISRC code from your label or when you submit it for distribution. So a lot of the times if you're working with a label, they will generate their own ISRC codes because their label is also contained in that ISRC code. But on my end, I've released a lot of singles, and when my band released our EP, we distributed it through CD Baby, and it was CD Baby, right? Yeah, we distributed it through CD Baby, and they assigned us our own ISRC codes because we're independent, we're not a record label, so we got our own unique codes regardless of what that was. Okay. So I'm going to do some mastering for you. It's not going to be super in-depth because I'm not totally sure how these monitors are going to work with Pro Tools and this Zoom course or whatever. But I will show you just the basics of what I do and how I set up things. But yeah, so before you master a song, it's a good idea to talk to the producer and or artist about the vision of the song or album. You want to make sure you're on the same page and uphold the integrity of the music. Sometimes you will get a mix that is so weird and has loads of noise or something, and you think, maybe I should RX this out, or maybe this low end needs to just be completely cut. Why is there so much low end? But if you do that without talking to the producer or the artist, you may be taking away some part of the song that they feel is essential to the piece of art as a whole. For example, I once mastered a song where a girl was singing into a mic, and this was in Nashville. Her name's Sam Lina. She's amazing. But she was singing into a mic, and it was a really hot day, and behind her there was a fan going. There was so much noise in the vocals, and I was trying to RX it out, and I was having no luck because it was loads of noise. And when I asked the producer, I was like, do you really want me to take all of this out? This is kind of really affecting the vocals and how they sound. And he was like, no, this is actually part of the song. We liked it. We liked the way it was, how hot it was on that day, and how it sounds, blah, blah, blah. Should have asked beforehand, could have saved me a lot of time. But then I figured out, you know, sometimes songs, they want that noise in it, or they want the boomy low end, as I was talking about. So you need to uphold the integrity of the song first and foremost. No egos in anything. Engineering, mixing, producing, mastering. There are no egos in this line of work. If you're an artist, you can have an ego. That's cool. But when you're respecting somebody else's art, you can't have an ego. So, Protools setup. I set up my session by having the original track muted on its own track, having a copy sent to an aux. My plugins are on that aux. My aux is sent to an audio track to be printed, and my audio print track has a loudness meter. I do this so that I can switch between listening to the affected versus the unaffected track. I also have to level match the unaffected track when I add gain on plugins. So let me see. Here is how I have it set up. I will make these both medium. So here is my setup. I've got my original track here. I'm also on, where is it? Options. My solo mode is I am on XOR because that makes it easier if I want to listen to the original. If I want to go back to what I'm going to be printing, how these plugins are affecting my print track. So here is my mix track, my final mix. Here is my modded track, which is being sent to this aux, which is then being sent to my print. I also have this extra track down here called level comp because I like to print my track and then compare it with the original when the LUFS is matching the original track. So you can hear what maybe sorts of dynamic range I might have taken out by accident that I shouldn't have taken out. You know, it's just putting things into perspective. If I turn my mastered track all the way down to what the original mix was at, is it still going to uphold the integrity of what the mix was? So, back to that. Next is, so I usually start off my mastering with listening. And that sounds silly, but listening is everything. If you want to go into mastering, a lot of the precursor of becoming a mastering engineer is doing a lot of transfers and a lot of QCs. QCs are quality checks. When I worked for Andreas Meyer in New York, I was not solely, but for a long period of time, I was doing QC checks to old pieces of old tapes from people. So I was just using headphones and listening to make sure I didn't hear any audible problems with what was going on in the tape. And if there were tape problems, there was a lot of having to, like, people would put it on one way, record something, and then turn it upside down, and then record it the other way. And it was just, I would have to go back and edit everything. So a lot of QCing. I also did a lot of listening to classical music and classical performances. and you have to listen to when people sneeze in the background that are, shouldn't be happening during like a flute solo or something really quiet, So listening is super integral in mastering because you want to make sure that you are hearing literally every part of the song. So usually I start off with a background listen, meaning I put the song on the background. Maybe I'll go do the dishes. Maybe I'll go, I don't know, eat lunch, something. I just want to make sure I'm catching anything that sticks out if I'm not actively listening. So if I'm, sitting at the table having lunch and then I hear some sort of like really weird frequency that's just humming throughout the track, then I'm going to be like, oh, okay, that might be something I need to work on. Write that down, take a note of that. It's just, I think it's a very good practice to do because when you're not actively listening to something and you notice something, that means there's probably something really wrong there, right? Unless it's something really cool that's meant to be really wrong. But anyways, I then go back and I do some critical listening through my monitors a few times. So taking notes, always take notes. Don't listen just once, don't listen just twice. Probably listen through like 10 times, honestly, because you want to hear everything that's going on in the song. And then my last round of listening I do is through headphones to see if there are any clicks or pops or plosives that might need fixing. RX,
Okay, so I've just switched to a different setup so that everybody can hear what I'm doing through the computer. Yeah, okay, whatever. So if I hear any noticeable pops or clicks, I first ask the producer or mixer if this was intentional. If so, I don't fix it. If not, I RX it out. Sometimes you get a really weird mix that has a lot of noise, maybe something you might not find pleasing, but the producer or the artist wanted that in the song. For example, I mastered a song where the vocals were recorded on a really hot day in Nashville, and there was a fan in the background, and it was very loud and mixing with the vocals, and it was really hard to take out enough of the fan to not affect the vocals, or it was hard just to not affect the vocals with how I was taking out the fan. But I asked the producer if that was necessary and if that's actually what he envisioned for the song, and it was, because he felt that it was part of the performance of how hot it was in Nashville and the room they were in, and it really suits the song actually after thinking about it. So it's just a really good thing to ask your producer or your artist if they want those noises in the background. There are many great noise repair softwares, but I learned on RX, and I am on a Splice plan where I pay monthly. Splice is awesome. You just, I pay $15 a month for RX, so I don't have to buy it all at once, and I can just sort of go from paycheck to paycheck paying it off, which is nice for me as I can't afford to buy, insanely nice, expensive plugins all at once. But anyways, on Pro Tools, I have created a small click to show you how I would RX things out in Pro Tools. There are several ways to do it. You can import your audio into RX directly, but if I have a master that I need to get done really quickly, I like to just do it with Audio Suite because it's just makes everything really quick and whatnot. But here's the little click I added in the song show. Hear that little That's also a good reason why you should listen through your song several times, because sometimes there's really subtle clicks like this one that I made, and you want to make sure you catch all of those things. So I'll take a section of the song, so there it is, just right in that little area. Audio Suite, noise reduction, it's a click, so declick, or declick works also for if there's click bleed in the back of your track, but I also find it to work for these little boys. So that says 10 clicks repaired. I usually just try to stick with the setting they have when you start, and then edit from there to see what works. That seems to work pretty well. You don't hear any noticeable artifacts, and it's such a small little bit that you shouldn't be hearing any difference between everything. So I'm going to render that bit. There it is, the modded track from the Audio Suite. And Yep, nothing noticeable there. You don't hear any really top end go. It's just literally pulling out the click. Another way to do this is you could take your whole audio file. You could go to RX Connect, and I'm not going to totally do that right now because it just opens RX for you, and then as soon as you go into RX you can see where the click is, and then you could take it out manually like that, and then you could bring it right back into Pro Tools and it will just copy and paste the track for you, which is really awesome. And it helps if you've got a lot of plosives in a song that you want to repair, or just like an overall hum that you want to get rid of. It's easier to see it all in RX than it is, but for small things like this, it's okay to just use Audio Suite, I think. So anyways, so we've listened to this track a bunch, right? We're going to now move on. I've done all my listening. I think that it is okay for me to start with whatever I have in my chain. I usually start with Ozone because Isotope is awesome. Next slide. Yeah, so I usually start with Ozone. I like to put a maximizer on first in case I feel maybe the vocals are buried or the vocals are too hot. A lot of the mixes that I've got, it's been one or the other, so I just like to bring everything together and have it all be mixing and blending and balancing well. So I'll put a maximizer on, then an EQ, maybe some type of Baxandall EQ. Baxandall is a specific type of curve on an EQ. It goes up and then it dips down a little bit and then it levels off. I should have included a picture. I didn't, but Baxandall, look it up. They're really useful for a lot of applications. I sometimes have a Fairchild compressor on it. I am a bit wary when it comes to compressing my masters because if your mix comes and they've already put a compressor on the mix bus, I don't feel you necessarily need a compressor on your master because I think that sometimes it's hard to control the stereo image when you add a compressor. It's just really subtle things, but it's all preference. You could put a compressor, it probably sounds good. I like to use an Air EQ, and then another Ozone, maybe a compressor, whatever else I feel is needed, and then the Waves L1. I usually save my limiter till the end unless I have something, but I could also put on a tape machine if I want to get. I have this sweet tape machine from Black Rooster Audio that I've been using recently, and it sounds really good. So maybe you want your master to sound like it's running through tape. Maybe I'll put that on and then I'll put on the limiter. I just like to have the limiter at the end. But also it's important to note that I don't stick to this chain all the time. This is a basic setup of what I like to start with. It's about serving the song. You may have to have a different chain for a different song, and I found that I usually have a different chain for every song I master. I don't usually stick to what I have. I just like to have these up, and then maybe I'll mix them around, but it's just nice to have a template with everything up, and then I can just go from there. So one of the biggest things in mastering that I think is maybe something that's overlooked by people just starting out is that EQ affects absolutely everything you do. Mastering means you have to think about the track as a whole. So if you boost 5K to help the attack of the snare, you're also boosting the 5K in the bass, the vocals, the guitar, the kick. You get the point. It's very important to listen and see how your moves affect the mix. It takes years to hear minuscule boosts and cuts in EQing, but with practice and time, you'll be able to do and hear the subtle differences. You'll be able to hear the subtle differences in 0.3 dB in boost. It's so important to be able to listen to what's going on in your mix or in the mix when you EQ things. I'll show you an example. I'm going to do quite drastic thing because it is hard to hear the subtlety and everything, and I'm still not that great at it yet, but like I had a teacher, Oscar Zambrano, who masters all of the singles for Spotify now, but he said when he first started mastering, and one of the mastering engineers was like, do you hear that boost in this, I don't know, in 10K in the 1.1 dB that I did? And he would click back and forth, and Oscar's like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. But now he's been doing it for so long that like you can hear everything. So it is just a practice makes perfect type thing. But yeah, let's go listen to the mix, I'll show you. Okay, so I'm gonna do some slightly extreme stuff just to see, just so everybody can hear. Here we go. So I'll do this chorus. Say we're listening. My knife and spit me my life. You are safe with me. I helped you break free. I think that around the, I don't know, 400 to 1K range, I think it sounds boxy, and I don't like it. So I'm gonna take out some of that boxiness. And look at this. Oh wow, I took out a lot of that boxiness. So here's it with all of that taken out. My knife and spit me my life. You are safe with me. So maybe we got rid of a frequency that we were hearing we didn't like, but compared to the original mix, my knife and spit me my life. You are safe with me. I helped you break free. I healed your sorrows. See how when I'm taking out all of that mid-range of the mix, the bass is coming up super loud, and you're also losing some of the harmonics in her vocal. So it's not a great thing to take out that much EQ, but maybe try pulling it back and taking out like 0.2 of dB, and then my knife and spit me my life. You are safe with me. I helped you break free. What I like to do is I like to look away, hit that band a bunch, keep looking away, play the track, and then as it's playing, hit it in and out, see which one I prefer better. My knife and spit me my life. You are safe with me. I helped you break free. I healed your sorrows and said think about them. So personally, I kind of liked taking that out because there's a bit of boxiness, and I liked how the bass came up as I took it out. But yeah, so it's just, trying to find the little differences so that you don't totally change the integrity of what a mix is, because maybe that boxiness was part of the vocals. There are a lot of songs that are engineered by Sean Everett where the vocals sound really weird, and you're like, wow, should they sound like this at all? But it's really cool. Listen to Perfume Genius's stuff. All of his vocals are mixed so perfectly and weirdly, and yeah. Anyways, but it's just, you want to uphold the integrity of the mix. Let's say I want to add, I don't know, yeah, let's add right there, because when I'm playing it, thing I'm noticing the most when I take that in and out are those delays on the background vocals, which sound like they've been distorted and high-passed. So adding all of that in there just, brings that out. But again, maybe you want to bring that out. Maybe you're like, oh, I really like the way that sounds, so let's just bring it back. And spit me my life. You are safe with me. I helped you break free. I healed your sorrows and said think about. Yeah, so I like that, and I don't think that really messes with the mix too much. So yeah, there's EQ. You want to be really careful with the moves you're making and what you're doing, because like I said, last thing you want to do is screw up the integrity of the mix. Let's go back to the slideshow. Cool. So it is Okay, EQ continued. Even very small boosts and cuts, like I said, can affect the sound of an entire mix or instruments. It's good to find frequency you're looking for, boost and cutting and notch equals blah blah blah. I went through this, I showed you all of this. I like to look away from the screen, hit the bypass button multiple times and listen. Eventually I forget which one was bypass and listen again, see if I prefer the bypass or not bypass version. It's okay to be unsure of your moves. It's all about trusting your ears and what you think feels best. Okay, so now let's look at compression. You want to compress but keep the range. One of the things I still have trouble with is compressing my tracks. Sometimes I use compressors just for the color and the gain staging, but there are often times where I actually need to compress the track. In my opinion, if you want to keep the dynamic range of a track, you want to keep the dynamic range of a track. You don't want to be printing a rectangle. I'm not a fan of no dynamic range in my masters, but some people are. But, you know, just my opinion. Compressing helps smooth out peaks that may pop out and not sit nicely within the track. It can also help pull some of the mix together. So let's go. I'm just going to turn this guy on. This is modeled after a very Mew. It's a really nice compressor, but so let's listen to, how about we listen to, yeah, just another one of the choruses. You don't want to compress way too much, so let's bring the threshold up just to like, I don't know, yeah, how about like negative 1.6, that works, cool. So the makeup gain is super loud for some reason, so let's bring the input back up here. I also like to use these high pass filters on my compressors if I have to compress my master, because I want to maintain the low end of the song. So I high pass out the low end so it's not being sent to the compressor and everything's not ducking around it, since the low end is going to be the loudest part. So let's just see what this sounds like. You are safe with me. I helped you break free. I healed your sorrows and said think about tomorrow. So to me, I don't really like it in. I think that it takes away from some of, it compresses the track and it brings everything up, but you can't really hear the reverbs that's happening in the sides, and I think that's maybe a big part of the track. So let's say I don't want to use the compressor to compress it, but I like the sound that this plugin emulates from the compressor. So I'll just turn my threshold all the way back, put my input gain as 0, and then just, you know, maybe bring up some gain if I feel the track needs some gain, but I'll keep the compressor on. You are safe with me. I helped you break free. I healed your sorrows and said think about tomorrow. So there's definitely a tonal difference in both of those, and I encourage you to experiment with it, what plugins you have if they emulate outboard gear compressors, just to see what they sound like and if you like them on the track. I personally don't think the track needs this, so I'm just going to keep that and bypass. Yeah, so let's go on to the next thing. So limiting versus maximizing. To be as simple as possible, a maximizer is a limiter, but maximizers make sure your peaks don't clip while raising the overall signal. A limiter makes sure your output level doesn't exceed your set output level. So basically, maximizer tries to level everything by bringing everything up almost like a compressor, and a limiter just makes sure that you don't hit your peaks. It's not a great explanation. They're pretty much the same thing, they just do slightly different things. So they're used for different applications. I like to start with a maximizer to help smooth out buried vocals if they are buried, and limit the end of the chain to keep a set level without clipping. Again, don't go overboard, you want to keep some of the dynamic range. So here is my Ozone plugin. I put a maximizer right here at the beginning. Let's go to the violin solo, because I know that's mixed super loud at the end here. think some of the attacks maybe are hit a bit loud, and if I turn on my maximizer, here, my maximizer was on, but here. Okay, so let's punch it in and out so you can see the difference. So it definitely does bring up the overall level of the track, but what I like about the maximizer in this instance is it feels like it's bringing up the sides of the track as well. So the violin might be coming up, but then you can also hear it leveling out a bit with the rest of the track. So. In that instance, without the maximizer on, I feel like the violin just sits right on top. Whereas with the maximizer in, it just sort of glues it together a bit more. I can show you, I'll turn off this EQ on here and level match it to show you. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to, the original is... So the maximizer is actually making this track a bit quieter, my print track. That's not a huge deal. I'll probably start adding gain with other plugins, but I'm just going to try to turn this up, see if I can level match with the original, just to hear the difference. Cool, so I don't know if you could really hear that well, but basically that violin was super loud and sitting on top of the mix. Just putting a maximizer in, not too hard, even though it's already quite a quiet mix. I could probably even afford to bring this down a bit more, but just putting a maximizer in to sort of bring that violin solo down and sit better with the mix. Here's my limiter at the end of the track. Just, I like to stay around maybe like 0.3 to 0.6 for my out ceiling, just because if you go to 0.1, then that leaves no room. If there's some sort of conversion between different streaming services, and you're at 0.1, most of the time that's going to cause some sort of digital clipping when they convert it. So it's a good idea to leave some just slightly more headroom with maybe 0.5, 0.4, you know. I'll just keep it at 0.5 right now, but here's, I'll turn this back down to 0. And we ran out of CPU power. Helps me bring up the track without going above my negative 0.5 noise ceiling. I wouldn't recommend going super low to like 30, because then everything's just going to be a big jumble of nothing. You can experiment with that. I'm not going to put my monitors through that because that's cruel. But yeah, so usually you can just set your level. just depends on how you're doing this and what your setup is and, you know, whatever. But once you're happy with how everything's sounding, you can. I also mentioned sometimes I like to add a tape machine. I like this tape machine. But this is also a good way to help gain stage if you feel like your track's not loud enough before it hits your limiter. You can add, maybe you can hit your tape a little harder, get your nice tape sound. You could be Jack White and have your 7.5 IPS going on. But, you know, that's going to affect the way your master sounds. 7.5 IPS means that you're going to have more low end and less high end. 15 means you're going to have more high end, less low end. So it's all preference, how you like. I like putting my stuff through tape. I think it sounds good. We can check it out if you want. I am safe with you. You make me brand new. You took away my night. Pro Tools runs out of CPU power. Anyways, you get the point. There's that. Next thing. Okay, so loudness. Loudness is measured in LUFS. LUFS is loudness full scale, measuring a piece of audio without reference. So this is how you're going to tell basically what your average overall level of your song is. Bob Katz recommends mastering a song with a target of -16 LUFS, close to iTunes standards, to ensure you keep the dynamic range and don't overcompress to compensate for the loudness wars. The loudness wars are horrible. We don't want that. We like dynamic range in our masters because we want to keep the integrity of the song. Depending on the song and what I feel it needs, I may go closer to -11 LUFS or closer to -20 LUFS. It's all song dependent. Think about if you're doing an orchestra and there's several really small clarinet parts that are happening throughout it, and only occasionally do they have huge fortissimo parts. You're probably going to be closer to -20 LUFS because the average of the song is going to be way lower rather than hitting all those fortissimo parts, right? But say you're mastering a pop song and the entire song, the bass is driving the entire time. You're probably going to be closer to -11 LUFS because that's how the song is just mixed. And plus, in the pop world, it's just generally louder mixes. So, yeah. The Loudness Wars, the wiki definition of the Loudness Wars, because I couldn't find really anybody explain exactly what it was in definition, but anyways. So the loudness war or loudness race refers to the trend of increasing audio levels in recording music, which reduces audio fidelity and, according to many critics, listener enjoyment. So I have this small example just from two songs that I know. Fall Out Boy versus Perfume Genius. So Fall Out Boy's master is completely squashed, whereas Perfume Genius still has range. Even though the loudest parts of the Perfume Genius song gets close to the level of the Fall Out Boy song, there's still more dynamic range and headroom. So if you notice over here, it starts off way lower than this Fall Out Boy song, right? So even if the Perfume Genius song has peaks that are similar or around the same level as the Fall Out Boy song, when this gets sent to iTunes and needs to be brought down, this song's just going to be inherently louder because the overall, inherently quieter being brought down because the overall level hits the peaks way more often than the overall level of this song. So the average of this song is going to be way less than the average of this song, meaning it's going to be brought down way less than this Fall Out Boy song. So in theory, the other side by Perfume Genius will have way more dynamic range and probably way more peaks. So it'll be just a better, more dynamic song than my songs Know What You Did in the Dark by Fall Out Boy. Okay, so to the right is a diagram that I took from Sound on Sound, showing the difference in the dynamics of two tracks. Kind of just what I explained in the last slide, but overcompressing, as you can see, the track on the right has much more dynamic range. Although the track on the left is perceived louder when turned down for streaming services, it becomes quieter than the track on the right. Why? This is because there is virtually no headroom in the track on the left, so the noise floor is significantly higher. When brought down to level match, the LUFS of the track on the right is quieter with almost no dynamic range. So the two screen grabs show two different tracks side by side, as you can see from the top screen, where both tracks have been peak normalized. The track on the right has been treated to significant loudness processing. The second screen shows the same two tracks matched for the loudness as defined by the new standards. The audible difference are startling as the visual ones. So just like I said, since there's no other place, all of those peaks are hit all of the time in the track on the right. Once you turn it down, the peaks then are all at one level, whereas the track on the left, it has many more peaks and much more dynamic range. So the average of the track being turned down, you're still going to hear all of those peaks and whatnot. So that's the end of it. The conclusion is there are a lot of things to consider with mastering. Just like any parts of audio engineering and production, it takes loads of practice. Always remember to serve the song as best as you can, because that's the whole point of what we do. Oops, wrong way. So here's my reading list. If you want to learn more than the surface level of what I covered, here are a few great resources that explain everything way better than I can right now. But Mastering Audio and the Art and Science by Bob Katz, literally the Bible of mastering. I refer to it all the time. It is great. It is perfect, and you should read it. Audio Mastering Essential Practices by my former teacher and all-around fabulous guy, Jonathan Weiner. He is like a mad scientist when it comes to mastering. He also does a lot of isotope stuff. He is the head of education, or the director of education at Isotope, I think. So literally anything on Isotope's website is also a good resource. But yeah, thanks for listening.